Today we have an interview with Tom Schwab, who is a person who's passionate about podcasting, which I am as well. And he helps business owners and authors build their brand through targeting podcasting interviews. We talked to Tom about a wide variety, starting with his time in the Navy and his role within the Navy. And then we talk about the transition from military to corporate, which he spent 12 years in. And then he became entrepreneurial with setting up a business in medical sales equipment and then Interview Valet, which is his current business now. We talk about podcasting being the new gold rush. We talk about building companies. We talk about building personnel, people that he employs to 35 people, which is great. And we talk about the role of podcasting in modern day marketing. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation. I really hope you enjoy it. And if you are enjoying it, please do give it a like. Please do give it a thumbs up. Please do subscribe and hit the bell icon as well. And you'll be able to see whenever the new episodes are coming up for release. So do enjoy it. Please, if you've got any comments, leave them in the comments below. They're really valuable. I'll read through all of them and I will try and incorporate those thoughts that you've had into the podcast and into the YouTube channel. So thank you very much. Enjoy the conversation. Today we have Tom Schwab. He helps business owners and authors build their brands through targeting podcast interviews. Hello, Tom. How are you today?
Mark, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So the first question I ask all my guests is, the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. What does a business mindset mean to you?
To me, it's serving. Right? The whole idea of business is, how can we find a problem? How can we help people? How can we serve? You know, the more you serve, my kids early on, you know, they'd say, you go to work to make money. It's like, no, you go to work to help people, and that's how you make money.
Absolutely. I think that service side is incredibly important, and sometimes not thought as much as important as it actually is. So I would 100% agree with that. So thank you. Let's talk about your education. So you spent some time in the Naval Academy and in the Navy. Why did you make those sort of choices at a very early age?
Well, I was a kid in a small Midwestern town. I had never been more than 100 miles away from my home. And I started to look at the price of college, and I thought, I'll never make enough money to ever pay this off. And I met somebody that was I went to the Naval Academy, and he had just been around the world. And I'm like, hey, that sounds good to me. And then I realized that it was, all the tuition was paid. So I applied, and Mark, by the grace of God and a technical error, I got in. Literally, I'm not physically qualified. I have no depth perception, but they didn't realize that till the senior year. And so then I got a waiver. But to me, it was just amazing. It opened up an entire different world, exposed to different people, different ideas, and really it changed my life. And I look at it now as the foundation of what I bring into business, right? I still think like an engineer. When people tell me, oh, you don't understand my business, it's so complicated. I could never teach this. I could never document it. I laugh, right? Because right now there's high school educated 20-year-olds that are running nuclear power plants safely in the Navy, right? If you can build a culture, if you can build a training to do that successfully, you can do it for your business too. So I've always looked at it as business as being scalable, being teachable, and then continually refining and getting better.
So you were, what actually is a nuclear surface warfare officer? It's a bit of a grand title. What was your role actually in the Navy?
So I ran the nuclear power plants on board aircraft carriers.
Okay.
So at the time I was on the USS Abraham Lincoln. At the time it was the newest and finest. Now it's just the finest, but we ran the power plants there, and also was a ship driver. But what I really loved is doing the operations of the plant.
Interesting. That's interesting. So you were very hands-on as an engineer within the Navy.
Very much so, and always thinking what could go wrong, running the drills, and being prepared for that, and always sharing information. Right, whenever we learned something from one ship, we would share it with the other ships, so that we were all getting better. And I think that's powerful in an industry or even within a company.
And why did you leave the Navy?
Do you remember 1992 when peace broke out?
Yeah.
Right, the evil empire had dissolved.
Yeah.
There was budget cuts, and I loved deploying. I loved my job, but it was tough on the family. You know, when people say thank you for your service, I'm like, I had fun, right? Thank the families that are left behind that have to deal with all the things.
Mm.
So I looked at it and thought, I don't know that my marriage and my family will survive another deployment. So at that point, I decided, well, I'm going to go from one stable, steady job to another. Right. So I'm going to go working for the government to I'll work for a big Fortune 500 company. And that's the thing to do. And what I realized is that stability comes from your ability to produce. And I wasn't happy in big companies. I liked being out there on my own, and I think I was an entrepreneur from an early age. It's just the culture that I was brought up in was taught to me that that's risky, that's scary. You shouldn't do that. You should be an employee, get a paycheck, and stick around till you get the watch.
We'll talk about your time in Striker in a minute. I just want to ask the question because I'm always intrigued that transition from such sort of rigidity, such structure in the Navy. What was the actual transition into civilian life? Was it a struggle? Was it to go back? I know you said you transitioned into a corporate, but was that going back into civilian life a difficulty for you?
Yes and no. I think the company that recruited me, they got a lot of ex-junior military officers,
Okay.
and we got out of the military, and you were always, there before the troops showed up. You left after the troops left. The definition of a half day in the military was 12 hours, right? You can work any 12 you want. So all of a sudden we got into the corporate world, and you'd work really hard. You were there at 5 a.m. You were there for 5 p.m. meetings. You were there on Saturdays to get caught up for the next week. And we would joke that it took us about a year to realize that most civilians don't do that. And by that time, we were successful. We'd been promoted a couple of times, and it just kept that work ethic up.
Interesting. So you went to Stryker, and you were in sales, distribution, operations, all the stuff you were saying, that operations in the Navy, into medical devices. So what was your favorite bit about that role? Because you were there for 12 years. Why did you stay so long? What did you enjoy about the role?
Because I got to change a role. So I got hired as an engineer, and I was an engineer for the better part of about 3 months, then got promoted to production supervisor, then distribution manager. And at the 18-month point mark, I hated it because I was in a building. And if you didn't like work in the same building, if you didn't live within 100 yards of me, if you didn't go to church with me and sit a pew ahead or a pew behind, I didn't know you. And I'm like, I hate this job. It feels like I'm back on the ship. But I had the opportunity to go out there and work with some of the sales reps, work in the theater or the operating rooms. And I'm like, this is exciting. This is what I want to do. And so originally, Stryker said, no, engineers don't sell. People from the inside don't go to the outside. So I took this little sabbatical, sold for a company that was a competitor for about 18 months. And they're like, wow, this guy really can sell. So I got brought back into a different division, and I loved it. It was every day was a new challenge. It was more entrepreneurial. And then I got to run my own distributorship. in Michigan here. And so in some ways I thought I had a business, but what I realized that I just had one client.
Right, right. And then you moved on to the owner of Goodbye Crutches, which was selling medical equipment. So was that your first entrepreneurial endeavor?
I would say that was my first one, because remember, again, in about 2008, right? Michigan led the U.S. into the Great Recession. And so the distributor, the manufacturer, came to me and said, we want to cut out the middleman, which makes total sense, right? Until you look in the mirror and you go, I'm the middleman, right? And they did right by me and everything. But after we sold that distributorship, we had a sideline business, and it was direct to patient durable medical equipment rental, right? It's about the most unsexiest thing you can be in there. But we had just done it in Michigan, and my wife and I looked at it, and about half of the rentals we got back came with thank you notes. We knew we were doing good in the world. We just didn't know if we could scale it. And at that time, there was no way I was going to do brick and mortar going into a recession. So I had read a book by two smart guys out of MIT, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Saw, that went on to form HubSpot. And I read the book and I thought, this should work for e-commerce, and reached out to the company, and they're like, yeah, it should. Nobody's ever tried it. And I'm like, well, let's give it a go there. And we ended up being their first e-commerce case study. Beretta USA, which is the oldest company in the world, was their second case study.
And so how many was in the company? How many people in the company did it build to?
Yeah, so we had 6 people that were all based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And that taught me that, with the internet now, you can be pretty much any place, right? We had distribution centers throughout the United States, but all of our team was in Kalamazoo. The other thing that taught me is that trying to find talent locally can be really, really tough, right? We had a small pool that we could pull from, and we were at that point serving just the United States. And it's not fair to a company to say we're open 9 to 5 East Coast time unless it snows, right? They don't care about that. So I realized the importance of having a remote company. And I did, after a while, I didn't like going into the same office every day. And we started to get to the point where I can do most of this work just over the computer. Why do I have to drive in there? So that's why I intentionally said any business I do going forward will be remote.
And what happened to it? Did you close it? Did you sell it? What happened?
We built it up and sold it off. The market was changing, and I'm glad we sold it when we did. E-commerce back, 2008 to 2014 was so less competitive. Now everything goes through Amazon, and it's really tough. And we saw that coming. And we also had just one small product, right? It was really hard to scale into other products. I didn't want to, so we were able to sell that off.
What was your experience of selling a business? Often entrepreneurs that I speak to that talk about selling their first business was pretty much a car crash, wrong valuation, wrong experience, wrong.
I left a lot of money on the table. And my wife later pointed out something in my life, that often the first 2 years, I'll beat my head against the wall trying to make it work. The second 2 years, it's going really well. It's really profitable. And then like the final 2 years, I'm just bored of it and want to go on to something else. I always want to keep learning. So I was in that point where I was starting to get to the point where I was bored with it. It was just like, take it. It's not worth fighting over, for the little bit of extra valuation. I didn't want to keep the business. So it's like, yeah, I want to go on to something else. And so that's intentionally now in my business. Now we're 8 years in. So I always look and say, what am I doing to learn to challenge myself so that I don't hit that stage again?
So let's fast forward to Interview Valet. So you started it in 2014. What was your, this is, I say early in podcasting. Podcasting obviously goes back to sort of the late 90s, the noughties when it originally started, but You go to 2014, podcasting wasn't as popular as it is now. It was still quite early doors on the second wave of podcasting being a huge success. What made you think this is the business that I need to set up?
Well, everybody's got an opinion. I wish I could say it was a great business plan, but really it was just what people were asking for. So after I sold my first business, I was in a mastermind. And some of the people in their business owners said, could you help me with my digital marketing? I was like, sure. That the hack that we used, back at Y2K was blogs, and then write guest blogs so you can tap into other people's audience. And they looked at me and, blogs were a homework assignment for them. And I had to be honest with them that blogging, even by 2014, wasn't working that well. So I hypothesized, and I bet you could use targeted podcast interviews just like we used to use guest blogs. And so I started to test it personally, helped a couple other people with it, and the results we got were amazing, right? It was fun. It was effective. And at first I thought, well, maybe it's just a niche, maybe it's personalities. So I kept testing it. I wrote a cheesy little PDF because I got tired of people asking me how to do it. And then someone said, well, you start an agency to do this. And I'm like, no, I've done this before. I don't know that I want to start another company. So I thought an online course, that will be easy, right? So Mark, I did an online course, and after 4 months, I killed the entire thing because we kept revising it, kept improving it. But what frustrated me was that people weren't learning from it. They weren't using the information. And if you look at the studies, it's like 3% of the people that take a course actually get success from it. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't feel good about taking people's money. So the people that were most honest, that were the beta users, said to me, I don't want to learn how to do this, right? I just want to be the guest. You take care of all the rest. And I'm like, oh, that's good copy, right? If I ever do this, I'm stealing that. And so started to beta test it. And in some ways, I wanted to prove, no, it won't work. And after 6 months of beta testing, it was working so well that we're like, we've got to share this with the world. And so that's when we took it out of beta and really launched Interview Valet. And now, 8 years later, we've grown to a team of 35 in Europe and North America. We serve about 200 clients at any one time. And some days I have to pinch myself to think, even during COVID, here I am in Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? A suburb of Kalamazoo, Michigan, talking with people throughout the world.
Well, who are your, I say typical, it could be ideal clients, but who are the people that you sort of target in your marketing?
Yeah. So we focus on 3 verticals, not necessarily where we are, but where our clients' clients are. So business, that's our largest one. That's about 80%. We also do health, nutrition, and wellness, and then a little bit of faith and spirituality. And our clients are typically businesses, they're coaches or consultants or even nonfiction authors that have a great message. They realize they could help so many people, but they feel like they're the best kept secret. Typically, they're serving either a national audience or a global audience, right? If all your customers are within 10 miles of you, podcast guesting will not work. But they're people that have a system, have a product. They just are the best kept secret right now. And, I believe that today, the biggest problem we all have is obscurity, right? Even if you're version 1.0, there are thousands of people that would hire you right now, pay you right now. The problem is they don't know you exist. So it's the question of how do you get out there and get known by the people that could be great customers.
So essentially, it's a marketing strategy, isn't it, for authors, business owners, and it's just that you're using the medium of podcasting rather than Facebook ads or whatever other things. Do you find that do people understand that when they strike up or start inquiring about your business and how you run it? Do they understand the role of it being a marketing strategy?
You're exactly right. And we call it podcast interview marketing. And the way that the conversation starts most of the time is somebody comes and says, can you get me on a podcast? And I'm like, well, if you want better answers, you got to ask better questions. Nobody just wants to be on a podcast, right? Maybe it's an ego thing, but the question is can you help me grow my business being on a podcast? And they're like, well, isn't that what I said? I'm like, well, not exactly. If you're looking to grow your business, grow your brand, that's definitely what we do. And it is a strategy, right? It's not a tactic. It's not a hack. It's a strategy of how can I leverage other people's audiences in order to get my message out there to grow my business. And it's a strategy that was used, you know, 50 years ago, when people would go speak at the Rotary, they would speak at the golf course, the Chamber of Commerce. They were leveraging other people's audiences. And today you see the same thing. You know, you get invited to somebody's digital stage or physical stage to go talk at their conference. You're doing the same thing. It's just today it's so much easier to do it digitally over podcasts.
Um, how do you demonstrate to clients and leads the return on investment of being a podcast guest?
That is a great question. And there's this idea that everything in the world is perfectly attributed, right? That we should have numbers on everything. And podcasting doesn't. We do have areas that we have where you can attribute the traffic coming back to your website by sending them to a dedicated welcome page, to ask people where they found out about you, to quantify the things like this is the content that came from it. This is the content that could be repurposed. Here's the visitors that came to your website, or, you know, here's the sales that came from it. A lot of times early on, it's more qualitative than quantitative, where people are like, yeah, a lot of people are talking about our podcast appearances. And there's a gentleman, Rand Fishkin, ran a company called Moz, and he explained it the best. He says, when I'm on a podcast interview and somebody hears me and then they get my name wrong, but they go to Google and put it in, well, all of a sudden Google says there was an ad at the top. They clicked that. Google's going to say, oh, that came all from us. No, it for some podcast too. Or then you're on the site and you get confused, or not confused. You get busy, you leave, and now there's a Facebook retargeting ad that pops up. You know, 2 days later, you click back through and you buy. Facebook's going to say, oh, we did all of that. Really? The problem is that no, if you wouldn't have had that initial exposure, you know, exposure brings opportunity, and that's always not attributed by the people that are trying to sell you ads.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to really, because the people that I have on my podcast, they're sometimes through your company. There's a couple of others that do something similar, and I find that your guys are a little bit more professional. Some of the I don't want to criticize other companies per se, but I always find that there's a really good atmosphere and a really good interaction that your employees sort of strike up when reaching out to me, and I've always been impressed by that. How have you built your team up to 35?
Building the systems to support it, right? When you've got one or two people doing it, it's easy, right? They can talk back and forth. When all of a sudden you hit that 8 to 10, you better have some systems to document things for everybody to share a database that we're all using the same procedures. So that has been critical. The other thing that has been so important is the culture, right? Our mission is to personally introduce inspiring thought leaders to millions of people they can serve for the betterment of all. That should be, you know, tattooed somewhere on me, because I say it so often. All of our team knows that. They know all of our values. And when we do make decisions and somebody asks, what should we do here? I always push it back on them and say, well, what do our values say? And make sure that they tie it to it. Because especially with a remote team, you're not there to see everything, or for them to ask questions. So you want to make sure that they think like the company thinks or like the owners think. The other thing that we ran into is last year we were at a point where we were hitting about 28 people on the team. And when you got 28 nodes, you look at all the connections between them, it just gets really, really big. And I was frustrated. And I'm like, I am not the first person to ever run into this. What do other people do? What have I seen other things? And all of a sudden it struck me. It's like, well, idiot, remember what they did in the military, right? You've got a squad, you've got a platoon, you've got a company, all the rest of this. And what I'm trying to do is put all 28 people in one little unit. So at that point last summer, we said, let's break up into, we call them pods. Let's break into 3 pods that have a different focus by the customer focus, right? Is it health and wellness? Is it business? Is it real estate investing? Web 3.0, all of that. And so we broke it down. And once we did that, the complexity went down. The communications improved greatly. And now I've looked at that and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I tell the team is that once a pod gets up to a certain probably dollar amount, we're going to start breaking that pod again. Right. So, as we grow, I want to grow the pod, grow the leaders within the pod, and then them know that when we hit this critical area, we're going to go ahead and break that apart. So they look forward to it, that it gives them more leadership positions, gives them more advancements. And I also know that not am I only trying to grow sales, but I'm also trying to grow leaders in the team.
And do you have in your pods, did you say you split them by industry of so authors or business owners, or do you break them into HR, sales, marketing, admin? How do you break up your team?
We break them down by focus of the podcast, right? Because the people that are really big into health and wellness, man, they understand that. They understand the podcast, or they understand what's a good fit, right? If you give them a show that is, web 3.0, they could probably do it, but they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't have that, that understanding. And trying to be an expert in all those different areas is impossible. So we help people focus. And most of the time we put them where their interests are, where they'll say, yeah, I want to learn more about, marketing and sales and investing, web 3.0. Oh, perfect. Let's put you in this pod. And they love it because they're learning from the podcast, they're learning from the guests, and they're adding a lot of value to it.
It's really interesting that you've and have you changed your business model throughout 8 years?
Continually, right? I wish I could tell you that I had this perfect business plan at the beginning. I always say the best piece of fiction I've ever read or written was my early business plans, right? I had everything figured out. Every graph was a straight line up and to the right. And what I realized is that, I've got an opinion. I can hire a coach or a consultant. They've got an opinion. But the ones that have the answers, the experts, are the ones that are voting with their dollars and with their time, our customers. So I would continually ask, especially early on, what brings you the most value? What don't you care about? And so all of a sudden people would tell you what they love and what they loathe. And I just had to be smart enough to double down on one and stop doing the other one.
And you've got a book. And I must admit, I downloaded your book on Audible. I've been trying to binge as much of it as before I interviewed you. I didn't finish it, but it was a really fascinating. Why did you think, or why did you choose to include, in essence, another marketing strategy with your book?
I wanted to share with what we're doing, right? Everything we do is not a secret. It's not a mystery, right? It's a process. And there was so much questions out there, and I realized we can't serve everybody, right? There's verticals that we aren't in. So I've been asked so many times on, well, how do you do this? And like I said, I had that cheesy PDF at the beginning. It's like, no, we need to make this realistic. And it's only 100 pages. So it's not a great long novel, but it shows the process of here's how to do it. Here's how our system works. Here's how we do it. And here's how you can get success from it. So I really just wanted to share it out there. I sell a lot of books, but I give more away than anything. And it's like thank you for plugging my book. But if anybody wants a free copy of it, I'll give you a link on the website.
Oh, I should have known
You can go
before I
to.
bought it.
Ah.
No, it's fine. No, I'm only kidding. Anyway, I because podcasting is so important to me, Audible is very important to me as well, and I use them interchangeably. So, I actually, I can't remember. Probably I read my last book was probably 3 or 4 years ago. Audible is so accessible and so easy to use. I find I go to that as my starting point with now. Why do you think you've described your business in interview marketing as the next gold rush? Why do you think it is the next gold rush? And is that actually true? Do you see it sort of surpassing YouTube? YouTube, the numbers of it's quite a saturated market. There's thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably millions of channels. Why do you think podcasting is the next gold rush, and could it surpass YouTube?
Well, I think it's merging into YouTube, which is really interesting. It's like, what is the definition of a podcast? I mean, there's a technical definition with the RSS feed, but right now, a podcast, well, YouTube is one of the best search engines right now for podcasts. People go to YouTube to listen to them, to watch them. Facebook, you can stream them from Facebook. What was it? Sirius XM bought some podcast networks in order so they could have the content for it. So if I'm listening to it on Sirius XM, is that still a podcast? What if I watch it on YouTube? Is it still a podcast? I don't care what you call it, as long as people are hearing about me. And even to the point where it's being repurposed now, right? So you can get the transcript, put that up, get the transcript and write a blog out of it, take different pieces out of it. To me, it's amazing because it's one of the few mediums that's very, very easy and accessible to create and then to repurpose into other things. So I think the whole term podcast, I think somebody's going to listen to this in like 2030 and laugh every time we say the word podcast, right? Because in 1920, radio was called wireless telegraph. And by 1930, it was radio. I remember asking my daughters, what's the pod mean in podcast? They rolled their eyes and said, I don't know, Dad, what's it mean? They've never known a world with an iPod. So to them, it's meaningless. So I think we're going to see it morphing. And the other thing that I think it's more than ever right now, the gold rush, is because it's the only mass media platform out there that you own, right? That somebody can't just at a flip of a switch or because they felt like it, take you off, right? If you say something that YouTube doesn't like, or somebody reports you, not even for a good reason, you could lose that entire platform. Same thing with Facebook, other things. So that censorship, if you will, with podcasts, if somebody, complains about you on YouTube, yeah, they might take you off there, but there's still dozens of other platforms that you can stream that to, right? You can still stream it to your website. So I think there's a great power in podcasting that you don't see in any other medium. The other thing too is that you can consume it when you want, where you want, at the speed you want. There's not a whole lot of other things you can do that way.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I do know there's a guy that I follow followed more previously. He's called London Real with Brian Rose, and he's a guy over here. He's an American stockbroker who moved to the UK and London specifically, and he started his show 6, 7, 8 years ago, and he's now developed that YouTube is a major channel for his show. And he had a couple of controversial guests, sort of naysayers and sort of conspiracy theorists, and YouTube actually pulled him. They pulled his whole channel and all of the episodes that had these controversial guests. Now, as you say, with podcasting, I've never heard Apple Podcast or Spotify at the moment ever pull, because of certain content. I suppose there is this debate at the moment. Spotify are being a little bit controversial with some of their guests as well, Joe Rogan, people like that, with content leaders. But there is definitely a different, like YouTube will pull channels or episodes where you don't tend to get that as much with podcasting. Is that the advantage? Because it's a devolved medium. I sit in my loft in my office and I interview you and hundreds of guests that I've interviewed. The love of it for me is that it's very simple. You can just get yourself a good camera, get yourself a good laptop, a good microphone, and then you just start interviewing people. That's why I love it. Why do you love podcasting so much?
Well, I'm an engineer by heart, right? If you told me to write, it's a homework assignment, right? When I wrote the book, I scripted it out, outlined it, then I read it, or I talked it through. That was the original draft, right? So that's how I can communicate best. It's an easy way for me, and I think most business owners, to get their message out there. It's also very, very scalable, right? I remember pre-pandemic, I was speaking at an event. It was a perfect event, right? Perfect clients, all the rest of that. I got halfway through it and just sort of chuckled. And I said, I'm speaking to 75 people here. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the drinks and the hors d'oeuvres. But on a podcast, it takes me 45 minutes. I speak to thousands over time. Whereas here, I drove an hour and a half. I had to get my slides together. This is going to take me the better part of 4 hours to address 75 people. And guess what? If your phone went off in the middle and you left for some reason, you missed it. Whereas a podcast, just hit pause. You can come back to it or rewind. So I think, to me, the medium is so much more powerful. And look, I live in rural Southwest Michigan, right? My customers are not right next to me. So in a decade ago, if I was doing this business, I would have to be in London or New York or LA. I don't want to live there. I like my quality of life here. And guess what? The dollar goes farther in Kalamazoo too. So I think it's an amazing time there. And nobody asks you with a podcast, where are you? Where's your studio? All the rest of that. Really, they judge you by the quality of your content, not by other things. So from that standpoint too, I think it's less, if you want to call it, discriminatory. It's more inclusive of everyone.
Absolutely. A lot of my listeners are business owners and entrepreneurs. So I just want to delve a little bit deep. So you said you've got 200 clients, which is great. It's fantastic. And how much of those 200 are reoccurring clients that just renew their contract over and over? Or if you are marketing hard and finding new clients, like what's the percentage of renewals to original clients, and how do you market to find your leads?
Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, we're at about 70% renewals. That being said, book tours a lot of times intentionally don't do renewals, right? If they're just trying to do a podcast book tour to hit a list, we work with them for a certain period of time. Last year, we had 4 books that hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So we already know those aren't going to renew. Some of our clients early on, if they're just 1 or 2 people as a solopreneur, all they need is maybe 1, maybe 2 campaigns in order to fill up their calendar. So they're not doing it forever. But the ones that are bigger, that can really scale, they're not only continuing, but at times they're adding talent, right? At one time when we were working with HubSpot, at one time, they had 6 different people that were quote unquote talents. So that were out there talking there. So the way we get our clients is the same way we teach. I'm on podcast interviews. There's our team members that go on podcast interviews. We really think this is more of a relationship sale than trying to do paid ads. That's a way. And then the other thing is referrals. 70, I just looked at it, like 73% of our clients come from referrals. And that could be a referral from a previous client, a current client, a podcaster, or we work with agencies, right? Marketing agencies that bring us in as their subcontractors. It could be book publishers that bring us in, or PR agencies.
Okay, that's interesting. And would you say, like we talked about your business model, you said it's an evolving thing. Are you reviewing that constantly, or do you take a sort of strategy for 12 months and then you sort of renew on your how your clients are going, because the other thing that we haven't talked about, how do you get your podcasters into your community?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that question. I'm a very, on the Colby Index, a high start, fast. Let's do it. And as the company's gotten bigger, I've had to become more strategic of what are we focusing on to hit our numbers next year that we can put in place here. One of our core values is relationships are the ultimate currency. So we're always trying to build those relationships, both with our current clients, referring partners, and podcast hosts. So you'll see us, each client has a dedicated person inside. Each podcast host has a dedicated person, right? There's not 35 people that are emailing you from our team. There's just that one dedicated person. So we're building those relationships, pre-COVID, and now we're getting back to it where we go to all the podcast conferences. So people know who we are. It's not just a blind email from someone. And then we want to learn what the podcast is about, right? What are your goals for it? What are you trying to do? What's interest of you? So we do that work beforehand, because we don't want to just do, random pitches. I loathe that word pitch, right? You pitch an idea, you pitch a baseball, but you don't pitch a human being. That's dehumanizing, right? So we want to introduce, right? So you tell us what you're looking for. We'll go through our database and keep an eye open there. And if there's somebody that we see is a great fit, we'll make that introduction. So really we focus on that. And more and more, I just see random pitches. I get pitched probably 4 or 5 times a day to be on my podcast. And they all start the same way. Tom, we love your podcast and would love to be a guest. Well, Mark, the only problem is I don't have a podcast. I've never had a podcast. And I used to just delete the emails. Now I've got a text expander that basically says, sounds great. Would love to have you on the show. You send me a link to your favorite episode and I'll send you to a calendar link. Let's make this happen. Nobody has taken me up on that, but I'm thinking, if you're going to send me a robo pitch, let's make you work for it here a little bit.
And what's the plan for your business for the next 2 to 5 years?
Going deeper where we are, right? There's always this push of, well, you should do this. You should, help people start podcasts. You should do their social media for them. And so many times that I look at it and say, we could do that, but that's not our zone of genius. So I want to get deeper and deeper in the areas that we're serving, the people that we're serving. I want to grow the leaders in our company. Where I am right now in the business, I think that's our limit to growth. The faster that I can grow the people, the opportunities are out there, but I can't do them all. So I need to make sure that I'm growing people internally and then challenging them, because also I don't know of a whole lot of A-list players that want to do the same job for the next year, 5 years, 10 years, right? So to keep those people, I want to make sure that they're learning, they're growing, and that I have the opportunities internally so they don't have to look any other place.
Fantastic. Thank you. So coming to the end of the interview, I asked the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick-fire questions. They don't need a quick-fire answer. First decision is, what's the best decision that you made?
To ask for help. And it's often the worst decision I make. When I see a problem, I'll put my head down and think, oh, I can work through this. But when I ask for help, there's other people that have already figured it out. There are other people that are willing to help. So I have to remind myself of that.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
I'm going to flip that around and say, what's the worst piece of advice I've ever been given?
Okay.
It was from my grandfather. It was the only wrong thing that old Irishman ever told me. And he said, choose carefully who you drink with, because you can't choose who you work with. in his day it was true, today it's totally wrong, right? If I don't want you around my family, if I wouldn't hang out with you, if I don't trust you like that, I'm not letting you near my business. No judgment, but just the world's too short, and there's somebody that could serve you better.
Absolutely. Who's helped you most in your career?
I would have to say my bride, right? We've been married 14 years, and behind every great entrepreneur, there's a support system, and she's been that support system to help me at the low points, to remind me at the high points, and just to realize that it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Absolutely. Do you have any regrets?
Yes and no, right? If it wasn't for what I did, I wouldn't be where I was here right now. But if I had to tell myself 20 years ago, I would have said focus more on relationships, right? Because relationships are the ultimate currency, right? They can appreciate with time, if you nurture them, and death can't take away the relationships at time, and inflation doesn't kill relationships. So to me, I'd rather invest in relationships than any other currency.
This isn't one of the questions. I'm just interested. Do you have a coach or a mentor?
I do. I've got a coach, Todd Palmer. He was a client of ours early on, and I learned so much from listening to his interviews. And then I met him in real life. And what I loved about him is that he was straightforward with me. He called out my BS, that and some of my lies to myself. So I've got mentors in masterminds, in the entrepreneurs organization, but I think that's really, really helpful. And going back to that first question of, my best piece of advice or what I do is ask for help.
Absolutely. What are you most proud of?
The people that I've had a small part in developing, right? And that could be my kids, that could be team members that have worked for us and have gone on to other things. It could be college interns that we had, and now we're doing amazing things. I always looked at them and joked, and they said, remember me, because someday you're going to be hiring me, because they were so smart. I thought maybe they'll not only hire me, maybe they'll buy my company. But to me, that's that eternal thing. Money comes and goes, fame comes and goes, but long after I'm gone, these people will look back and hopefully think, wow, Tom had a small impact, or maybe they'll tell a story, and that of what I did for them.
What does legacy mean to you?
Legacy, and that's, I knew we were going there, and that's the thing I'm focusing on right now. I'm 56 years old. I hope that I'm at the halfway point in my life, and that there's a lot more in front of me. But all that I'm focused on is what am I going to leave behind, right? Of the stories, helping people. I can remember my grandfather's funeral that I mentioned. His legacy was the stories he left behind and the blessing that he gave me, because he was so well respected in the community. He was dead for 20 years, and still somebody would hear, oh, that's Jim Cunningham's grandson. And with that, I was good to go, right? Because of the legacy that he left, the impact that he left. And I hope the same way that, somebody, will say, wow, they were one of the early employees of one of Tom's companies, or, they worked with Tom, and all of a sudden they'll say, okay, that vouches for them. And, ultimately I want to set a good example for people.
Absolutely. And where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah. So I know you're multitasking on this, right? You're doing multiple things. You're probably even listening to it sped up. So here's a best practice. Always send people to one place they can find you. So just go to interviewvalet.com/absolute for absolute business mindset. I'll put all my contact information there. Free copy of the book. I'll put that there, and I'll also put my calendar scheduling link and all this social media. So if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'd be thrilled in order to talk with you and see how we could help you.
Well, thank you very much for doing that code. I'm sure some of my audience will really enjoy that. Thank you, Tom. It's been absolutely fascinating speaking to you and hearing your story and how you got to interview Valet, and then how we've gone deep into your business. So it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you and all you do.